Um, you know, control, leading questions, right? Even tone, the way that we approach crossing, doesn't necessarily work with a child, right? Because it's a completely different situation, right? You can't be aggressive in that way, right? One of the things that we love and are like one of the best tools that we have for cross is impeachment, right? And impeachment doesn't really work with kids either. So it's like, what do we do? All of the things that we know and love and use as our most important tools for cross, we really can't use in these. And I think that the off-script fear, right, is that your reaction to it is that you want to control more. And that's really difficult to do because asking leading questions of a child sometimes is not effective because it looks like you're controlling too much, right? And so there's this really hard balance between those things, both needing to control a witness who's not necessarily going to go with you, and the surprise involved, the shit that comes out of their mouth, and also not seeming like you're overbearing and overpowering. So that is, I think, the hardest balance of it. For those of you who have cross-examined kids, like, how did that go? What was the experience like?
Well, I have done it many times now, and I've had that kind of thing happen. And sometimes it works out. Your theory is that this kid just says whatever pops into their head, and that's what would happen.
Right.
But what you said about the impeachment, you can't tie a kid to their prior statement. That happened a year ago. They don't even remember making it, and or they can't read it. That's the other thing. Somebody writes down what they said, and you're like, here's what the officer said. They don't know what it is.
Right. Or even the setup questions for impeachment, right? Isn't it true that you testified on July 13th, 2003? What the fuck, right? You can't even ask the foundational questions that you want to ask.
And I've also found the prosecutor often gets away with things that they wouldn't have gotten away with an adult jury. Like, they'll show the kid the video of their little interview with the child interview specialist. You know, they've showed the kid the video now 3 or 4 times in the course of things, and it just now the kid can't distinguish whether they remember the video or they remember it happening, or
Yeah, but I feel like that's a good thing.
No, yeah, it actually did end up in not going.
How many of you guys have that? We don't have that in our jurisdiction, where a videotape of an interview takes place with a child, and you get that?
Yes.
Wow, that's awesome. That's protocol?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? You have that too? Wow. Okay, so that is such an amazing tool. Why is that so enormously useful for cross?
Tone of voice, body, and all that stuff is there.
You can see the child's, the way they present themselves, their demeanor, and that can help you guide your own tone when you prepare, right? Because that's a huge chunk. It's just sort of preparation.
Well, I mean, I did it once, and the one time I did it, it actually didn't work out because when she did the video, the complaining witness was like 7 and a half.
Right, and she was 9
She
or
was
whatever.
10 or something when she was 10.
Yeah,
She
so
was a completely different person.
Yeah, that's something I know to talk about too, just about, the age of the child at the time of the incident versus the time when she's testifying, because a lot of time there's a huge delay, and they're actually different. How many of you have kids? Okay. That's a big advantage in many ways. We're going to talk about that too. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to start. I was trying to sit down and think through, like, where does cross start for me when I'm preparing one of these cases, right? It doesn't come when you sit down and start to write your cross. It starts really at the beginning of the process when you're investigating your case, because the investigation of the case feeds into the cross. I think the first thing is, of course, I think there is the pull of whether or not, the incident happened or it didn't happen, the story that unfortunately your clients often can't tell you a lot of information about these things, right? Because what they'll say is, look, I didn't do those things, I have no idea why she's saying this, right? That's kind of what you get. And of course, there's these cases are incredibly difficult for our clients for obvious reasons, right? It's the most mortifying and stigmatizing thing to be accused of that there is. Very often, sex abuse cases with children involved are intra-family cases. Has anyone had a sex abuse case with a kid that wasn't intra-family? What was that?
It's pretty close though, renting a room in the home.
Okay, so in the household. Okay, similar. What was your?
I've had just neighborhood, an apartment complex, they play in the parking lot.
Okay.
At some point, they went up to one of their apartments. This is the juvenile defendant, as well as being the victim.
That's interesting. Okay.
A worker in a bodega, and the kid was coming in to buy something. I don't know.
One time where they.
One time, and took the kid to like that room. And
Wow. That's fascinating. I have never had a child case like that. Anton and I both work in the Bronx. I've never had a child case not intra-family.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What was yours?
I had a home invasion with a random victim and he tied up the family and then raped the little girl.
Wow.
Stole all the
You still have, it's still the winner.
No, we went to trial, we lost.
And what was your defense? What was the theory? of
Somebody
the
else
case?
did it. A older guy, he had a mask on. But he confessed, so he fucked off.
Confessed, and there's their DNA.
No. Because he gave her a shower afterwards and looked her off. Cleaned her up.
He was smart too. Wow.
Until that
That
confession.
What was the sentence?
30 years at 85%.
We don't have percentages, that's interesting. Okay, so, there's this sort of trying to figure out what happens, and what I mean by that is either what really happened, or what is the story that you can fathom happened within the confines of the information that you have, right? So how do you develop a story of what happened here that either explains those big questions, which is embedded in all of these cases, why would this child say this, right? And, what contextually could have happened that led to this result. So I feel like these are some of the things that I like to look at, right? Like the various relationships between the parties in these cases you have to begin to understand. And I guess I want to say, when I say marinate in the family, that's sort of like my favorite expression when it comes to these cases. And I mean that. These cases are the most interesting, I think personally, and complicated cases that we get because there is medical evidence, there's scientific evidence, there is psychological evidence, right? There is shrinks involved in these cases, and there are these very, very complex human relationships that go on within groups of people, families, and sometimes, pushing outside the family dynamic, right? And so in order to truly understand how to defend these cases, it takes time. It is more of that than anything else that you need to be patient with. You're not going to figure out in a day why a child would say this. It takes an understanding of the intra-family relationships, the relationships between the parties involved, and who this child is in order to figure this out. And sometimes it takes months to kind of get it. And so you need to do whatever you can to learn as much information as you can. And so if this is a situation involving a family, there are all sorts of things going on between all of the different players in the case. So you have to first identify the relationships, and then you have to really begin to understand the relationships. Almost all of these cases, at least that I have involved, often involve families, custody, separation, anger, betrayal, like all of these sort of complicated human interactions in between families, and you have to really understand them. And it takes time, and it means meeting with and understanding what is going on with these people. You need to understand what this child's routine is, right? Because if you're trying to understand who has access to this child, what their day-to-day is like, what are they exposed to, what What do they do with their time? What kind of child is this? It takes a lot of work. And it can come from so many different places, getting this information. So you really have to, well, this is about outcry, but like, I think it's really just important to to dig into these things and do it in ways that maybe you're not thinking of, right? So, because sometimes it's hard, like you maybe don't have access to the child, which is, most likely. And I'm not saying never, because I have done investigations and gotten statements from children. I don't know if in your jurisdictions there are any, limitations on your ability to do that, but we don't have any in New York. But, investigate the case. Get out there, send your investigators out. If you have someone, try to speak to the child if you're able to do that. Talk to other people that know the child. Find out, make a family tree, right? Figure out how the people in the relationships are related to each other and what their connections are. What are the tensions or dynamics between all the different people on the case? And then you really want to understand how the different players interact with your client, especially if it's relationships like mom, kid, father, boyfriend, whatever, because that's sort of the typical dynamic, and you want to understand how those things play out between each other. The outcry becomes an incredibly important piece in the puzzle, right? Everybody understands what I mean when I say the outcry. It's the moment where the child speaks for the first time to someone that this incident took place, okay? So who do they speak to? Who is the person that they made the outcry to? When did they do this? Why did they do this in that particular moment? What were those circumstances? Who is the person that they made that outcry to, right? And why? Now, and the form that it comes in, I tried a case where my client's daughter made an outcry through a composition that she wrote in the school. And the letter, this composition that she wrote, was her outcry. So that was really kind of a bizarre and interesting way in which this information came forth. Sometimes it's to a family member, a female family member who's a relative, a cousin, something like that. But the circumstances under which that telling happens, who spoke first, who spoke the words of the interaction is really important. So I'm gonna sort of use a case to sort of talk through some of this, and I'll just give you some of the little facts of this case just to use it as an example. So the case that we're gonna talk about is this young girl who was in the household with her mom and her brother. Her brother had some developmental difficulties. Our client was the father of the little girl, and also had a cousin. The little girl had a cousin who had also made allegations against our client, and those charges had been dismissed previously. Our client was not living in the household at the time and had not been for some time, approximately 8 months, something like that. And the little girl was caught by her mom taking pictures of her vagina with a PSP, which I didn't even know took pictures, but apparently the cool new ones took pictures. And she was told, her brother told on her to her mom, and the mother confronted her about taking the photographs. And also at the same time while this was happening, some other weird incident happened in the house where some other little boy had kissed the brother, and so she was confronting him about that, and then he told the mother about her taking the pictures. Very stable household. And then the little girl told about these allegations about the father from like 2 years, said that this happened like 2 years earlier. Okay. we found out that she had just previously learned about these allegations from the cousin that had just happened. Like, she just learned about the fact that she had made these allegations about the cousin. So that's basically sort of the set of facts that comes up. And so digging into the underlying way in which this particular outcry came out became really interesting, right? Because, oh, and I also, the little girl said that she had told her mother about this the year before, but that the mother didn't believe her. And that when the mother was asked about this, the mother said she didn't remember her ever telling about any of it. Just kind of sorry. So we had that. And then this case was actually in family court, and they did a validation. They had a validation expert. I don't know if any of you are able to, if they can do that in any of your jurisdictions, but in family court, they can have a validator interview the child so that they can avoid calling the child in a family court proceeding, and have the validator come in and testify. So her statements come in pursuant to a statute, the kid, and then they can call a validator to say, yes, I interviewed the child and I believe the child. I know it's crazy. It's crazy. It's not criminal court. It's fine. It's crazy. But anyway, it's really kind of interesting because then you get this report, right? If there's a concurrent family court case and a criminal case, then you have this interview by this validator, which contains a whole host of statements by the child. And it was sort of an interesting case because she told the validator that it didn't happen, and she told the validator that she didn't tell anybody it happened. There was a lot of like great stuff, which is, ultimately the case did not get prosecuted in criminal court, but this is just a fact pattern. I'm gonna play around. So in this particular setting, it was like digging into the motives, right, about why this child would make this allegation. And the whole issue about her, like, taking this photograph of her vagina became like the tipping point for this question and answer. And so one of the things that became really interesting to me is like playing out, it's kind of like what we did, all week about our cases. Try to imagine that conversation. The conversation with the mother and the kid, right? What's the question that the mother asks?
Why were you taking a picture?
Why were you taking a picture of your vagina, right? Why are we doing that, honey? That's kind of a weird thing to do. Why are you doing that? And of course, according to them, the answer was that she outcried about this incident, which makes no fucking sense, right? Like, why would that be the answer to that question, right? And so if you really start to kind of dig into that moment, just the moment of it, and try to imagine, like, the question, the answer, how this actually comes about, it then begins to sort of reveal a lot of other things, right? And so, the facts of this are obviously fairly simple to sort of build a case, and using it as an example, which is that, this little girl had a place to put this information that she had learned about her father, and it was a perfect place to not actually admit this really embarrassing weird moment for herself. And so it was a place for her to do it. And we also tried, if you think about it, you can build in this idea. There was also some tension between the mother and the father, and it was a perfect opportunity for the mother to say, did he do this, right? And that she fed this information. She was the one that led this information into the conversation. So who brings it up? The circumstances under which this happens. What are the surrounding facts? All of that stuff starts to become really, really important. And it can become the pivot point for you now to begin to formulate a theory which can lead to your cause. So I feel like the outcry thing is a really important moment to begin to like put the pieces together. And you also just want to see like what role your client played in this, if any, right? Was he around? Was he not around? Why is he being discussed? How did he come into this picture? Any of that. By the way, does anybody have a case where their client is female with a young boy
Yeah,
or girl? A
young boy. Yeah.
Okay. Nobody else, right? It's pretty young. Oh, you have?
It's
But not thinking of trial, but I have.
And what was the relationship?
So in the case I did, she was 18 years old. She was the sister of the, how does it work? She's the sister. It's one of those really crazy Jerry Springer things where every woman involved has 3 children with 3 different guys. But she was the younger sister of the woman who was competing for the dad's attention with the mom. The kid's dad, victim's dad, has 2 women in his life,
Okay.
has a child with each of them, and then my client is sister of the other woman involved, the younger sister.
Everybody gets that.
No,
Okay, so this is a perfect example of why you need to make family like a tree,
Yeah.
seriously, and then like start to really understand the relationships, because these cases can be so complicated. And sometimes, like the people are related to each other, and then sometimes there's like a branch off this way that the people are involved together, and like sometimes it just takes a long time just to even figure that shit out, and then to try to figure out how the things cross and like what the connections are and what the motives are and who is mad at who and why and all that. It's like you got to distill all that stuff early and quickly, and then begin to like soak it in, because it takes time to really understand. And sometimes you don't get the information right away, right? Like you find out that like this person knows a lot about this relationship, and then you can go learn from them, and then all of a sudden it could be like one fact in that relationship that starts to change the way you see the case. I mean, I had a case that took me literally like a year to even begin to formulate an idea in my head about how I was going to fucking defend this case, because I just couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out like, why would anybody in this case like do this to this guy? Like it just didn't make sense. And then something happened. It was like one thing just changed everything, because I like got a small piece of information that changed the connections in the relationship. So, and so that's sort of invaluable. But that's interesting. I don't know. I'd love to talk to you about the dynamic of having a female client, because I haven't had that. So these pieces are really, really important to also figure out. Like, what does this child know about how the systems work that you are working within, right? So do they know about the criminal justice system? How do they know that, and what do they know about it, right? Because, at the core of a lot of these cases is some sense of the child wanted the father out of the house, right? Does she know that, or he know that if I bring these accusations against this person, something bad can happen to them, they can be removed from the house? Do they want out of the house? Do they understand the family court system? Do they understand that if there is an allegation filed in this case in family court, that they can get out of the house? Sometimes kids want out of their own house, right? There's abuse or there's bad shit going on in their family, and this is an opportunity for them to get out, right? Is the relationship between their parents so fucked up that they want their parent, or whatever, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, not to be together, right? So there's always that stuff going on, and how the kid knows how the systems work and ultimately lead to those things is really important. I'm not sure how this plays in other places, but this is like a huge issue in New York, because there is so much, at least in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, like the criminal justice system, the family court system, ACS, and how all of those systems impact on our clients' lives. It is so intertwined in people's lives. There are very little resources for our clients in the communities to get help in other ways. So they don't go and seek help. They don't go to a marriage counselor to help with their problems. They don't go to a therapist, right? They go to the police. And everybody's lives are so involved in either the criminal justice system or family court system. That's where they look for the resolution to their problems, that the discussions about these systems is so prevalent in their families. Even little kids know all about this stuff. It's almost like it is common world understanding in ways that other things are in other communities. And so I feel like that piece helps so much in helping you develop a theory and the motivations behind why a child would say something about the client. What the kid knows about sex, right? Same thing, right? Because if you're whatever it is that your theory is, this child has to know about the sex from somewhere other than your client putting his penis in her vagina, right? So is there some other place where this child actually has information about sex? We just did a case where the kid was exposed to watching pornography with her cousin, like, who in the world would have thought of that? But like, you know, we investigated the case and we actually found a witness who watched, saw this boy showing this kid pornography. There's, you know, pornography, sex, the exposure to it is everywhere. It's, you know, it's on the internet, people watch it, it's in books, it's on videos, like kids, and another thing just about the way like our, in the communities where I work and I assume you guys work, like people don't live in a house where there are like 4 televisions and, you know, 3 stories in their house, right? You live in a small apartment, there's 1 television set and a computer in a room and everything's pretty small. Your parents are having, your mom and your mom's boyfriend are having sex in the same room that the kid sleeps in, right? Like everything's small and pretty confined and there's exposure to things that you maybe aren't really thinking of. So, I mean, I had and the sex, I have physical exams. I don't know if you guys have ever had this issue come up. This is like a huge issue, at least in my practice. Because sexual assault is such a prevalent problem, and I think this is, well, I don't know. I just think it's true in the Bronx. I've noticed this. I don't really know where it comes from. I guess it would be cool to understand a little better, but I don't know. But moms asking their daughters from a very, very early age, did somebody touch you? All the time. You know, did anybody touch you? It's like a fear of sex abuse that causes a parent to ask these questions. I mean, I have a 14-year-old daughter. The idea of asking her that question, it never fucking crossed my mind. But it's very, very common.
It's good parenting. It's what the schools teach the kids their parents should be doing. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And I had in one case, the case with the letter that I was telling you guys about, where she did the mother was doing physical examinations on her daughter.
What?
You know, she thought she was a gynecologist. Craziest shit I ever heard in my life. I mean, she was doing what was she looking for? That's what did she think she was going to see? I just don't get it. But she would physically examine her kid. So this was a case from the kid had chlamydia, which is how the allegations came out in the first place. They tested my client to see if he had chlamydia, which he did not at that particular moment. Thankfully, the prosecutor didn't really know enough about chlamydia to know that you could have chlamydia and then get rid of it, get treated for it, and then not have it show up in the exam, thankfully. But we, and also played around with the idea, so the mother was like having met a lot of men over, and the kid would watch the mother knew that the mother was having sex with other men, and she would do these physical exams, so we created this impression that the kid got chlamydia from the mother's hands, which of course is also impossible, but it's okay. But do you know what I'm saying? That so we use this idea of her touching her child inappropriately and doing all these things, and then the questioning of the sex, right, starts to put in the kid's idea very, very early on in their lives that, you know, that this happens, that it's a possibility, and that it's a concern of the parent that mother's worried about it, right? So that happens a lot. And then the language of sex, right? Like where the kid learns the words that they use to describe things is important. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but the sort of questioning of the child, the way that the child is questioned is incredibly important. And the words that they use to describe things is really important, and where they've gotten that language from. Right, because in different cultures, things have different names, and where they got that name from, or, you know, and sometimes, we'll talk about this in a minute, but, so that's really important, and then ultimately the relationship between the client and the child's mother, you know, sort of at core of a lot of these cases. And whether the kid knows those things, right? So that's kind of where we are in that, right? So it's what does, and who is she aligned with, and why? Right, and so is the kid maybe speaking standing up for the mother in some way? Is she trying to protect the mother? Like how does she perceive that relationship and how does she sort of fit into that picture? Okay, so we talked about this a little bit, but you also want to sort of explore who this kid is at core, right? Like, is this a kid who lies about lots of stuff all the time? And fantasy, we have this case where the kid was, had like this, like friend, that she talked to, she sort of talked to herself, but she had a friend that she talked to. And so even taking that idea and spinning it into sort of a fantasy place, like the kid had a fantasy, the kid had a fantasy friend that she engaged in, and if that's true, then the child, can engage in fantasy all the time, and try using that as a way to, sort of get involved in it. Does this person have kind of an interest in your client? I mean, that happens, right? There's like, she secretly has a crush on the client isn't really, giving her any of that, and so she's mad, so she says things about the client, or does she hate the client's guts, right? How does she really feel about your client, and where can we get that from? So just like put in here, and again, this is jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but getting that information can come from a lot of different sources. If you can subpoena things, if you can do an affirmation to get records, family court is like the most amazing place to get records. I don't know if you guys have ever gotten family court records, if you're able to. In our jurisdiction, you have to file an affirmation for the basis, to set forth a basis for the court to sign an order, to look at them. A lot of times, the judges here in my jurisdiction will do an in-camera. They'll sign it if they think there's some connection in some way, shape, or form that you've been able to allege through your affirmation, and then they'll do an in-camera inspection of the records, and if there's something in there, then you can get them. Family court records are chock full of information. Like, they talk to everybody, they interview the kids, they interview people that know the kids, and there's so much stuff in there, and there's things in there that can be really useful. In my office, we actually represent the parents in abuse and neglect petitions, so sometimes we are doing the cases concurrently, so that's how I know what's in all of those fucking things. The validation reports sometimes are in there. If you could recall, if there is a concurrent case going on and you're not representing the client in that context, find out who the lawyer is, see if you can get permission to get the discovery from them. In some family court proceedings, there are rules about not sharing discoveries, so just be careful about that. Trying to get school records can be really interesting, medical records and psychiatric records. I've done subpoenas to get psychiatric records from kids. If you learn that from your client that the child is been treated, or even if in this case, there's the child getting treated as a result of the trauma, right? So there's the after the incident, and then there's, in those records, sometimes they'll refer to them being treated for other things, and then you can sort of begin to dig into that. So it's like, this is like
It's just irrelevant. That's what I was just told last week.
yeah, well, I think you have to be creative to try to write an affirmation. There's some decent case law on the way in which, it bears on mental health diagnoses, et cetera, bear on credibility, both in terms of testifying and making allegations. So, a lot of times you're going to get shut down, but if you do some good research, I think, there are some decent cases, at least we have some, that if you can set forth a connection either between that and the case or something connected, right, that gives you the ability to get it. Try. It feels a little like a fishing expedition, I get it, and maybe it is, but you know what, you might get a judge to sign it, and sometimes you get stuff, and all of a sudden the case sort of starts to open up. So it is really like, I said that when we started marinating the case, I mean it, you gotta, this is understanding all of this crazy dynamics that go on in the family, and there's lots of ways to figure that out, and see if you can get it. You're not gonna, the cases all turn on all of this stuff, these interrelationship stuff, betrayal, anger, frustration, right? And it's there's no other way to get to it unless you really dig into this stuff. So if you can try to be creative and get some of these things, do it. Okay, so I kind of feel like these are the the two theories, unless somebody, unless it isn't necessarily interfamily and it's a stranger, I think it's a whole different dynamic. But I was kind of trying to distill like the two theories that, kind of really come out in these cases, which is the child believes that it happened, right? Like they really believe that it's true and they've been influenced by someone to make the allegations, right? Or the child knows that it's false and is testifying about it intentionally to somehow either hurt the client, get something, get out of the house, right? It's an understood, knowing thing. It feels a little to me like those are the two scenarios. Yeah.
You can combine actually two of them.
Okay.
The child knows it's false and is being influenced by someone else.
Well, that's true. The child.
I'm just thinking of Munchausen's disease, Munchausen's by proxy.
Okay.
Um,
That's what I was thinking of.
I'm just
Wait,
thinking of my own case right now.
Yeah.
That's why. So,
Well, can you explain what you mean?
yeah, mom and dad divorced, very acrimonious. Father received placement, which is an anomaly in my jurisdiction. Usually mom gets placement. And mom's got a pretty defined history of making allegations against dad of the same nature against my client.
Okay.
There's a history of it. And in the medical report from the ER, it clearly states that there was a previous history of this, and that victim told psychiatrists that mommy remembers what daddy does to me because I can't, things along that nature. So,
Mommy
Mommy
remembers
remembers,
what daddy did.
and she wants me to tell you this because I can't remember, stuff like that.
That's what she's telling them.
That's what she's telling the psychiatrist. But it's not relevant.
So child is telling doctor, I don't remember this, but my mommy remembers it, and she told me I better tell you that.
Yeah. I can't remember how those bruises got between my legs. Well, my mom remembers, and she wants me to tell you that daddy did it.
So what does she say when she testifies?
I'll let you know.
I mean, how does she testify?
That's why I'm
She
here,
can't
because I
testify to that.
Wow, she can do whatever she wants to understand. It's not, I don't even respond.
No, but I mean, she can't say,
I don't remember, but here's what happened.
yeah.
But by the
she
time,
can't-
but the thing is, by the time you actually interview the child, she may well say, oh yeah, I remember.
Maybe she remember. But then
She
you
gets done
have,
with the therapist, she will.
Actually, based upon that scenario, I filed a subpoena for the mother's psychiatric records. Who's denied.
and what is the history with the mother and the,
You know, the mother's got serious mental health problems, and that's the reason why she didn't get custody placement. And since that time has made a crystal clear path. It's a path, you can see police reports going back to 2008 where
filing allegations?
filing
against-
allegations and each one of them turned out to be baseless. Yeah, but all of a sudden, now they're real. But I just noticed it's a combination of the two, because the child knows that they're false,
Right,
and she's still being influenced by mom.
okay, fair enough, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I don't know, but can anyone think of sort of another way to think about it? I don't know, I couldn't really come up with another one. Yeah,
I mean, I do have a concrete
Yeah.
example,
yeah,
like in the case that I had with the female defendant, with this complicated family dynamic.
yeah. Which I
Kid-
still have yet, but it's okay.
Yeah, I know.
It's too complicated.
So the kid's mother
Yeah,
hates the other woman in father's life.
okay,
And my client sometimes ends up babysitting the children that they all have in common because they tend to get lumped together in the same households as they work and stuff. And so my is the sister to the other woman. She
Okay.
babysits the kids, like a number of them, from time to time.
okay,
Mom's giving kid a bath. At the bath, mom's leaning over. They're all the women are just flatly, seriously obese. And so mom's leaning over, and then she talks about how her breasts are brushing kid's head or something while she's like reaching for something in the tub. And she says, "You have boobies like Sarah." And all of a sudden, off we go. And next thing you know, kid has been rounded up and brought over to Sarah's house because mom is just crazy on fire at it. And says, "Tell me what you told. Tell everybody what you just told me in the bathtub." And she's saying, "Well, yeah, Sarah puts her boobies in my mouth. Sarah puts her pee-pee in my mouth." Because at this point, and so the kid, it's unclear whether, what happened is the
the mom seems to seriously believe something's happened based on what this little 4-year-old kid has said.
Right.
Mom believes it's true. Kid doesn't understand that she's hurting anyone or that he's hurting
How
anyone or
old is
accusing
the kid?
anyone. He was 4 at the time,
Okay.
6 by the time he
Yeah.
testified. And so it's just one of these things where kid doesn't know, doesn't understand the
Yeah.
ramifications. He's not
Not at
trying
all.
to hurt anyone.
Right.
It's not even clear that he knows he's alleging anything strange. You know, it's boobies touched his face and he's talking about boobies in his mouth. It's just this big misunderstanding where it seems like everyone's acting in good faith maybe, but
Doesn't she,
just a total misunderstanding.
does she have motivation against?
She hates my client's sister and hates that her kids are sometimes in her care.
Okay,
And so it's not really about my client, it's about my client's sister. But
okay.
that's not who the kid talked about. He didn't talk about the sister, the sister talked about my client. So it's just one of those things where it was real unclear. By the end, mom was saying, oh yeah, he said that boobies were in her mouth or pee was in her mouth, in his mouth, and it's unclear if the kid would have told you that. Just
And what happened with this case?
went to trial, but it was not guilty. Because it was a big misunderstanding and on the stand, the kid, even though in our interview the kid said it happened and stuff, if on the stand you could get the kid to say, I don't remember anymore if it happened or if I just was telling you what I saw in the video. You know, I mean that's
Oh, this was the case where he
Yeah.
watched the video over
Can I
and
use
over.
your witness?
right. I mean it's just one of those things where it's just a big snowball out of control. It was really hard to say anyone's acting in bad faith, but it was really easy to show the emotional weight and stuff. So
Okay, well, that's interesting. So that's a case where sort of emotions kind of just, like the discussion of it,
yeah,
right?
It was the conversation about it turned
Right,
it into an
just turned
allegation.
it into it. And I think, I don't know if you were able to do this on cross, but just this, so the emotion therefore drives the need to get the information, and maybe that need to get the information
Right.
leads to this leading kinds of questions,
Right.
Because I think once you get that, it's like, well, what else did he do, right? And even
Yeah,
that
no, that's right.
question, right, is a leading suggestive question, and so there's a lot of research, which, I didn't actually bring stuff on this topic, but there is some really interesting research on, social science research, on the way in which interviewing children impacts on the way that the information is told, right? And protocol and the right ways to do this, and who's trained and who isn't
Right.
trained to do this. And so if you have a case where this becomes, the issue is about the interviewing of the child, which is what we're getting to, you need to really learn that stuff, right? I actually have some materials on it, which I didn't bring with me, because I didn't even know I was doing this until I got here. But if you're interested in that, I have a lot of data on that scientific research about the ways in which interviewing techniques of children take place. So do you guys know about sex abuse accommodation syndrome? Is that something that you have? So this is a really interesting, so this happens a lot in our cases in New York. So they call, this goes along typically with a delay in the report, okay? So what happens is, the prosecution puts the kid on the stand, and the child says, well, I was raped 2 years ago, 2 years before I told about it, right? And there's a huge delay in the report, and the anticipation is that we are going to argue that the delay suggests that it didn't happen, and they want to call an expert to explain that the delay in the report is consistent with abuse, okay? So first of all, when they do this, and I have like a box of shit in my office with like binders and binders of information. If any of you ever have this come up and you need help, I had this come up a lot in cases where they were calling these experts to the stand, and I kind of became obsessed with destroying these experts because this shit that they say is total horseshit, and it kind of started driving me crazy. And so I had a lot of these cases, so I started collecting like cross-examination, directs and crosses of these people, and articles that were written about them, and articles that are written about the syndrome. And the syndrome is really interesting. It was something that was developed by a psychiatrist who was putting together data after interviewing children who had actually been abused, right? As a practitioner, he was seeing kids that had been abused in therapeutic setting and began to describe these behaviors that he saw in these kids that had been abused, right? And so now what these paid whores do is that they come into court and testify and say, oh, a kid who exhibits those behaviors must have been abused. It's taking the result and backtracking to go back and say that a person's been abused. Explaining that fucked up scenario to a jury is pretty complicated. It's like saying like, that like the results, the result there is correct, so therefore the question is right. It's like so crazy. So, and it was also created, the data of it was developed as for practitioners who are treating patients, not to testify in court and to say whether or not the abuse took place. So the first thing is just being able to like think through and be prepared to deal with an expert who's going to come in and try to fill in that hole. Okay. The opposite of it can also though be sort of an interesting thing to play around with, and this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about. So the thing that they use to explain the delay piece is this. And just so you understand, like the expert will come in and say, let's say the kid is doing poorly in school and is sort of reverted like behaviorally to bedwetting, all of a sudden their behavior changes and, I don't know, starting to mouth off to their parent when they never did that. The expert will get on the stand and say that's consistent with abuse. But they'll also say the exact opposite, right? Like any behavior can become consistent with abuse, which is sort of part of the ridiculousness of the syndrome. But the piece about the delay, this is what they usually say. They say that there's a person in the household who's the father. It's the child sex abuse accommodation syndrome. So it's developed as a result of you talking about kids in the house where the father or the father figure or a man in the household is the abuser, right? And the idea is that the person, that man, is the control figure. And that by engaging in this relationship with the child, he develops this control connection with the child, and the child is not going to tell while that person is there because of that control. And that typically the kid will delay in reporting the event because that person is there and that control still exists. But the moment that that person leaves the household, right, the control is gone, and that's usually when the person tells. And that's what they usually offer to explain the delay of the report. Okay, so I guess I started thinking a lot about the fact that that makes some level of sense, right, which is that sometimes the explanation for the delay can relate to the timing of that. But then I started thinking about how to invert that, right? So if that's true, right, then anything that's sort of counter to that scenario, which they typically testify to, can sort of help you, right? So if in fact the person, the abuser, is in the household with the kid, right, and the abuser leaves the family setting, but they don't report it for another year or two, that sort of doesn't make any sense. Like, why wouldn't the child tell right away when the person leaves the household? So if you can start trying to think about ways to play around with inverting their social science, which of course, we like to shut down when they offer it, but when they don't offer it, to use it as a way to help you, can be really interesting. Or if, like, the client never lives in the house. Like, what is the explanation for why the child doesn't tell right away, right? And then you want to start to think about who else had relationships with this child, particularly women, in which you would expect the child to actually tell. And this happens, this is a very common thing that comes up in these cases, right? And so you might want to begin to think about exploiting the relationship between the child and the mother. If they have a good relationship, why wouldn't the child come to the mother and tell right away? Or if there are other women in this kid's life, other strong women figures in that person's life, a cousin, a teacher, right? All these people that could fill in that role. So it's like you're using that idea to explain, if this had happened, right, this kid had so many people to tell. So it's kind of just like playing around with using this syndrome in some ways to help you. And then there's sort of the doctor piece, right?
Can I ask a question about
Yeah,
that
yeah.
syndrome there before you move on?
Yeah.
Have you ever been successful, like a motion to eliminate, to just like exclude it and that the judge won't allow?
Yeah, we've tried it a lot. There's a lot of case law on it in my jurisdiction. The real interesting thing about this stuff is that the original cases in New York grew out of a rape case, a stranger rape case between adults. And there was a delay in that case. And they based it on sort of rape trauma syndrome, right? That there was a delay between when the woman was raped in that case and when she told. And it was connected to the trauma, right? The testimony about why they allowed it in was to explain her delay in reporting, because in that situation, it was an adult, right? It was a totally different situation. And they let in testimony about rape trauma syndrome to explain the delay. That case became the case to base the admission of this shit into evidence, which I don't really understand, because they're really very different things. So I have tried to, we have in our office filed this motion, and they've done it in other places in New York, and it has flatly been denied. So in my jurisdiction, it's coming in. I think it's a great idea to try to move to preclude it. Maybe you can get a hearing and get the expert on the stand ahead of time, so you can kind of get a sense of what the person's like. If you're going to cross-examine one of these experts, send out feelers to other people. There's always like a handful of these people who do this over and over and over again for money, right? And like in my jurisdiction, there's like 2 of these people, maybe 3, that just do this. There's like 2 that do it over and over again. I know people that have subpoenaed like their tax returns to show how much money they make from this shit. There's case law all over New York with crazy bad case law, cases that were like reversed based on these people's fucked up testimony. There's a woman who testifies in these cases in New York who had testified in this incredibly famous case in New Jersey, and the case went up to the Supreme Court, whatever the highest court is in New Jersey, Supreme Court in New Jersey, and got reversed on appeal because of her involved, the way in which she conducted interviewing of the children in the case. So there's so much shit out there to use to cross-examine these people. But I think it's a great idea to try to preclude it. We have not been successful in being able to do that, but if this comes up in a case, I would absolutely do it. And I think, so there's the sort of that piece of it, like the psychological piece, right? And then there's kind of the medical piece, right? Because most kids go see the doctor pretty regularly if they even, you get well visits and all that crap. And I can tell you as a parent of a girl, when you go to see a doctor, doctors ask the question of the kids, is anyone, touching you down there, any other than your parents? They do an external genital examination of children. If you want your kid to be alone with a doctor, you can, you're allowed to do that. A kid can ask to talk to a doctor by themselves. It's an opportunity for kids to tell when they're in a setting where people are actually looking at them and examining them. And if a kid wants to tell and has been going to see this doctor, I don't know, my kids have gone to the same pediatrician their entire lives. It's a person who they're potentially comfortable with, and it's a moment for a doctor to examine this child. So you always want to see if you can find out, like, when was the last time the kid went to the doctor? How many times has the kid gone to the doctor in the last 2 years? And you can use that to build into your cross, like about the failure to disclose the information. Okay, so the failure to tell and the delay can also become a huge sort of tipping point in these cases. So this is just what we were talking about before. Like, you really want to see, and again, sometimes getting this information is really difficult. It is. There aren't necessarily places to find out about it, although it's interesting to me that you guys have these videotapes in family court. It's videotaped often, the interviews, but in my jurisdiction, it's not, so we don't see that. But,
They not only do they videotape it, but they have like manuals that they update about how it's supposed to be done, which is awesome for engagement.
Yeah, so it's great. So actually, if you guys have a manual like that, if you could like PDF it and send it to me, and I'm happy to like send it around to you guys, because that's it. Whatever that protocol is the protocol about the way the question.
And what's even better about it is you can use it to kind of show the problems with the way, because the child interview specialist is never the first person you question the child. Their mom is, or whatever they told is, and so then you can just say, look, mom didn't do this.
So questioning it, right, so that this whole thing, right, the questioning by the police or whoever, that is not the first questioning. And of course, you know parents don't know shit about how the appropriate protocol to question children. And that you know the immediate reaction of a parent is to question, you know, who touched you? What did they do to you? Like, it's going to be leading. It's going to be totally opposed to protocol. And by the time the kid gets there, it's already done. It's already happened. So you want to know how this happened, whether or not it's been, you know, were they trained in proper techniques, what the techniques are. If there's protocol, get it, learn what it is, you know, what the circumstances is. And I don't know, have any of you guys moved for a taint hearing in your jurisdiction? Okay, so you have, you guys have done that? Okay, so this is like, I have never seen this before. I have a list of some cases, you know, in some jurisdictions where they've granted taint hearings. In New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Washington State, Kansas, our jurisdictions so far that have granted taint hearings, at least that I'm aware of. So I think that, you know, you can, if you get enough facts to begin to allege the mechanism by which the questioning took place, you can ask for a taint hearing. And I think I actually have a motion that somebody gave me, in my office, now that I'm thinking about it, I might even have it actually with me. Exactly on this issue of moving for a taint hearing, which, you know, obviously is a mechanism by which to both get that information, enlarge what you have about it, and begin to sort of go after the mechanism by which the taint happens. There's also sort of the post-statement taint, right, which is once you get this, the reinforcement of that statement by parents, other people talking to the kid, the sort of reinforcement of that information that they've shared, right? So if you think about, you know, all the shit that you're sort of learned at least about a little bit in terms of interrogation techniques and the way in which, you know, cops interrogate our clients and ways in which, you know, people, like, this is a whole different thing, but it's sort of a similar mindset, which is you're beginning to think about the ways in which information is gotten and how it got there and how it got reinforced. And so it's just another tool for you to try to get more information. Okay, so, you know, this is just basic. You really want to know your discovery, like, back and forth. You want to know every fucking statement that your kid made. You want to make charts, do a timeline. I'm like hugely into making timelines in every case that I have, so you really understand the way in which the events flow from one thing to another. You understand the scope of the prior statements. You know, even at the hospital when the kid is examined, they make statements. So there's all these places where statements are made. The police, the doctors, the nurses, the parent, the validator. You know, start to take your theory and you want to start to break your goals into your chapters. So tone. We started to talk about this a little bit when we started. So how old is the kid? Right? Now a kid that's like 12. Let's just say she's 12 on the stand. So we were talking about this before. How old was the kid when the allegations were made? How old is the child now? Those are different things, developmentally, right, and in terms of the way the child presents. So you want to understand both of those ages. When you understand whether or not, when it's the child is 12 that's getting on the witness stand, first of all, just start to, like, spend some time with a 12-year-old if you've never spent any time with a 12-year-old. If you don't have children, borrow somebody's kid. It is hugely important, I can't emphasize this enough, not just for understanding the language that the kid speaks, right? The language that you need to use when you talk to the child, when you examine the child. You can't use words that you're going to use when you cross-examine an adult. You have to speak in a different language, the language the child is going to understand. All 12-year-olds are not the same, okay? So you can spend time with a 12-year-old and then get into a courtroom and the kid presents, because kids at that age there's like a huge range in terms of maturity, right? And so we recently were cross-examining a 12-year-old little girl, And like, I know when my daughter was 12, exactly what she was like when she was 12. And this little girl came into the courtroom like with a stuffed animal under her arm, and she sort of presented like an 8 or a 9-year-old. And so the cross that this other lawyer had prepared was so off because it was like, just like the language was wrong, tone was right, the whole thing. And I was like, I called her over and I'm like, okay, shift down. Like, you gotta dumb down the entire thing. You have to totally change your tone because like it didn't, she couldn't even really process that the cross that we had sort of worked on was really inappropriate for this child. So if you can get a sense from records, right, or from your client, right, who might not know the child now, right, which is a little hard, or from people that know them, like what this kid is like. Is this a kid who's in special education? Is this a kid who's having difficulty in school? How does she engage with people? What does she like to do? What does she do? You know, does she watch TV? Does she play whatever? Does she actually read books? Does she not? Like, does she have older siblings? Right? Because that's really different than being the oldest child in the family. So you want to really see if you can figure out who this child is and what their age is, because your tone is going to differ. Okay, and also just like how the kid feels about the process, right? Like some kids are like, don't want to be there, or dying, like get me out of here, she's just there because she's being made to be there, sort of shut down. You know, it's also very common if a child has in fact been abused, that they're very, very flatlined. Have you guys had this experience where a kid's just like, you know, in your head you're thinking, oh my God, the kid's gonna cry and be emotional and blah, 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 and they're not, they're sort of like robotic and like flatlined because they've been traumatized or maybe for some other reason, but there's like no emotion, which can sometimes be even deadlier, right? So you really, if there is a way to find out like what you're getting, and especially these tapes, I think can be really helpful, and for you guys who have that, that's really helpful. Like prepare yourself. They might send the kid in with a stuffed animal or a doll or some crap like that. You know, you might ask and find out ahead of time. You might move and find out why they need to bring the dolly into court with them. I was just watching a fucking horrible video of my client, and they had like a doll on the table, and I'm watching, I'm like, don't pick up the dolly, don't pick up the dolly. And I'm like, she picks up the dolly, it's like, please don't show us, please don't show us. I'm like talking through the video too. It's like the worst shit ever. But they use anatomical dolls a lot when they have an expert meet with a kid to show things. You know, there's this woman, Lori Shanks, who's written a bunch of law review articles on cross-examining a kid. I have that also with me if any of you guys want the site for it. It's kind of interesting. She tells a story about, it's like about language and pushing past the expectation of what we think. A lot of times we think that if a kid describes rape in some way, shape, or form that has detail to it, and her example was that the kid said white stuff came out of his thing. And you're like, oh, that's bad. Right? That's bad because it's like a reality-based thing that feels real, right? And it's like, how would the kid make that up, right? It just is bad in that sense, right? Because that's kind of what you're looking for when you're thinking about like what does the kid know about sex and what, you know, what's the exposure to sex. That's probably not something the kid would see unless, you know, she was watching pornography with somebody. But other than that, like, it's kind of a vivid visual, the color, you know, all of it. So her example, she was representing this guy, and this kid said this thing, and the child went to meet with, I don't know how she got this, but somehow she got the child to meet with a psychiatrist. And so the kid was in this room, and there was like, you know, stuff in the room because the psychiatrist had like, you know, things for the kids to play with. And they were trying to get at this thing about her saying that, you know, the white stuff came out of his wee-wee or whatever she said. And so the psychiatrist said to her, can you go around the room and show me something that looked like and felt like the white stuff? And the kid's like, around the room. She goes over to the sandbox. She picks up the sand. She's like, this is what it felt like. He's like, oh, that's really interesting. Can you show me how much of the white stuff came out? And he's like, here, take this bucket and just put in the bucket how much of the white stuff came out. And the kid filled the entire bucket. So it's like, you know, these things that we think are real because they sound real might not be, because the kid could be parroting something that you heard. And when you push past it to really get to the detail of it, it becomes clear that it's really not real. So even though it feels scary, right, there might be ways to sort of try to get at that. And I'm going to give you another example. This wasn't a sex case, but I was cross-examining a 10-year-old little boy. And my client was charged with hitting the mother over the head with a baseball bat. And he testified that he was sitting right there basically saw the whole thing. And he actually had testified in the grand jury. I didn't even know that he was present during the incident for any of the material that I had. Like I had, you know, the whole file for a long time. I didn't even know there was a kid involved in the case. And so the mother testified, and she was a fucking disaster, and like ripped her to shreds on the stand. And I'm like, I think I have this case, you know? And they're like, oh, we're calling her son, the 10-year-old. I'm like, fuck, like where'd the kid come from? I didn't even know he was involved in the case. So they give me his grand jury minutes, and he tells what sounds like a pretty reasonable story. And I'm like, and I have nothing else, literally nothing else. Like there's not one mention of the kid in the case. Gets on the stand, and he literally parrots his grand jury testimony verbatim. And I'm like, this is what I had. This is my cross. Like, I had nothing. Like, I was like, I have no idea what the fuck to ask this kid. So I started asking my client, this is the middle of a trial, something like about the relationship with the kid and the mother and the father. Is there a father to the kid? My client had been dating the mother. They broke up. He started dating the neighbor 2 doors down. She was pissed. She found out that day he had sort of made a sexual comment towards her cousin or somebody related to her, and she was mad that he made this sort of move on his cousin. So she was raging mad, and she's waiting for him outside the apartment with a knife in her hand like this. And somebody calls him and tells him she's on the stoop and she's got a knife. So he gets out of the truck with a baseball bat because he's afraid she's going to fucking stab him. And they get into a fight, like a struggle. And she ends up with like a small bruise to her head, like a little bump on her head. But like, she basically says that he hit her over the head with the baseball bat, which is inconsistent with injuries. Anyway, they put the kid on the stand to describe the incident. And so I got nothing. Like I'm asking him like what he likes to do at school and what classes he likes, and I'm just like fishing around. I can't figure anything out. And finally realized like he's parroting his grand jury testimony, and just instinctively sort of try to push on the details. And he said, you know, my mom, he picked up my mom and forget the words that he used, something like tossed her to the ground. Just exactly this, it wasn't tossed, it wasn't that, but I'm just making it up because I can't remember what it is. And he used exactly the same language in the grand jury. And I said, you know, can you tell me what you mean when you say that word? Like, what does that look like? And he's like, well, he picked her up over his head like this, and then he threw her to the ground. And it was like, what the fuck? And it was like, all of a sudden, it became clear that he really hadn't seen this, and he was just describing something like some video game that he was playing or something, you know? And so I started to push him on the details, and the details all started to like become so outrageously unbelievable that it then became clear that he was lying. And then he started crying on the stand. Listen to me for a minute. And I was like, I was being so nice to him. And there was also another moment also that during the cross where I said to him, what do you call him? My client. I was like, what do you call him? And he didn't answer, he would not answer the question. Like, I meant like, do you call him Mr. Jones? Do you call him David? What do you call him? And he didn't answer the question. And so I argued on closing that, like, you know, he saw him as his father. There was this whole issue about the father not being around, and, you know, he was being raised by his mother, and he saw his mother getting taken away in handcuffs, like, whatever. There was more to it, but the idea that he couldn't figure out who my client was to him became this sort of thematic thing for me on closing. And it was his feelings about his relationship with him after he had left the complainant that became sort of the core of the case. But it sort of taught me a really important lesson, which is that sometimes kids say things that sound real because the detail sounds like a really important detail, but you really need to sort of push past it. If you really believe that the kid didn't see it or it didn't happen the way the kid said, like, don't be afraid to sort of push and try to get it. And I'm not saying it could come back and really bite you in the ass if it's not true. But I mean, if it is true. But I think that if you really develop a case and really believe in the fact that this isn't true, but that detail scaring the shit out of you, maybe it's not as scary as it seems. So I just wanted to talk about this for a little bit too. So do you guys? Oh, I have transcript. So what time do you have?
3:15.
We don't have to go. Let's get what we're talking about. So, swearability hearings, and voir dire on swearability. So have you guys done these, for those of you who do kid things, like whether or not the kid is swearable?
Yeah, and well, in a roundabout way. My case ended up being tried in juvenile court. My client was 18, but she was 17 when stuff happened, and they kept it in juvie for me.
Okay.
Didn't decline it. So we did, but one thing we did have to do was a child hearsay issue, which is very similar. I mean, can they understand the truth? Do they know what that means?
Yeah, that's
Do they
what I
understand? Yeah.
I don't know what my computer's doing, it's really scary. There's a little thing on here I've never seen before. It says, applying update operation 20,094 of 20,094. I swear that's what it says. I don't know. They do 20,094 operations. Oh, it's starting. Yes. Okay, so basically what happens is the kid is young, and the issue is whether or not the child is swearable, right? Can the child understand taking an oath and the difference between telling the truth and not telling the truth? And these hearings always happen the same way. Does somebody know how this happens? Like
Judges, kid questions.
the judge does it?
Well, if the judge prefers to.
And do they ask them these ridiculous questions like, this pen is, what color is this pen, right? Let the record reflect that the pen is blue. Honey, if I said that this was a red pen, would that be the truth or a lie? Like, really? Like, what does that have to do with telling the truth and swearing? It's like the stupidest shit I've ever heard in my life. So it's like, seriously, like, pushing on this. In the article that the law review article that I just said that I have, like, has a lot of stuff on swearability and the scope of it, which is that you can try to push past just the stupidity of those questions, but first trying to even understand the paradigm that they're creating in those questions. Is that the right paradigm? I mean, really? Is that what we're questioning, is whether or not the kid can tell the difference between a blue pen and a red pen? Is that about truth-telling? My favorite is in this cross that I was going to read to you. Jeff, there's a bug also on my computer.
A few over here too.
Jeff and I were sitting outside before having lunch, and now there's bugs everywhere. So, the telling the truth under oath and appreciating the consequences of that, that's really what the issue is, right? When you swear to tell the truth, do you understand that and the consequences that flow from telling the truth? I wanted to read this transcript to you guys. If I can figure it out. I did with it. it also had come up, like sometimes in your discovery, you'll find that, you'll learn that the kid had lied to the parent under other circumstances or had told a lie in the past. Or the kid might say, which I think she does in this transcript, I think the question is like, do you know what telling a lie is? And she says, yeah. And I think on cross she even does, she asks whether or not the kid has ever lied before, and she says yes.